In your investigation, did you think that this was a single attempt by the Russians to get involved in our election, or did you find evidence to suggest they'll try to do this again?
No, it wasn't a single attempt. They're doing it as we sit here. And they expect to do it during the next campaign.
Election meddling and election security certainly were big topics during the Mueller hearings last week, so you'd think what Mueller said would cause lawmakers to take action. Well, they did do something, but that something does a whole lot of nothing. Senate Republicans blocked 2 election security bills just last week. Those measures would require campaigns to alert the FBI if foreign entities offer help. It would also help to improve cybersecurity. And there's another bill that already passed the House, which would provide states with money to increase election security and infrastructure, and would also require audits of vote counts after elections are held. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell also blocked that one. Now, the same day those bills were blocked, the Senate Intelligence Committee released a bipartisan report showing just how sophisticated and far-reaching those Russian efforts were in 2016. That report says the Russians targeted all 50 states, and Russian intelligence, quote, used an unprecedented level of activity against state election infrastructure. Also, the Russians did try to actually change votes, but apparently were unsuccessful. The report was heavily redacted, but its conclusions are clear. The Russians tried really hard to sway the election, and as we heard from Robert Mueller, they are trying again. The Russian hacking and disinformation campaign is so far-reaching, it even got involved in spreading conspiracy theories about a man named Seth Rich. He was the DNC staffer who was gunned down in Washington in 2016. Police call it a botched robbery, but the far right had other ideas and spread other theories, and it turns out Russian intelligence helped. The Russians secretly faked or planted a fake report claiming that Rich was gunned down by assassins who were working for Hillary Clinton. It said Rich was heading to the FBI to report Clinton for corruption. Needless to say, this was and is and continues to be devastating for the Rich family. That story is also the focus of a new podcast called Conspiracyland. The host of that podcast, Michael Isikoff, joins me now. He's also the chief investigative correspondent at Yahoo News. He's also Michael, it's amazing what you've learned about Russian influence just in this one example, the Seth Rich case, which is wrongly linked to the Clinton campaign in the 2016 election. Cannot stress enough that there is no evidence of any connection. But through your reporting, we're learning a lot about how Russian influence works on our news and our politics and our opinions and, by extension, our government. For example, you learned that the conspiracy theory, which is all over conservative media, actually began not with a random Russian or, as the president would say, a 400-pound guy in his underwear, but with Russian intelligence.
Exactly. On Seth Rich, the 27-year-old DNC worker who was killed on July 10th, 2016, walking home after a night drinking at his favorite bar. Police quickly concluded it was a botched robbery. But within 3 days of his death, the Russian intelligence service, SVR, their version of the CIA, circulated a fake bulletin alleging that Seth Rich had been gunned down by a squad of assassins working for Hillary Clinton. This was the first real story that, or full-fledged claim that linked Seth Rich's death to a political conspiracy. And it soon migrates from that Russian intelligence bulletin, a portion of which shows up on an obscure website that same day. It migrates to alt-right websites, and then supporters of then candidate Trump start picking it up. Roger Stone tweets about it on August 9th. That same day, Julian Assange, in an interview from the Ecuadorian embassy in London, suggests that Seth Rich was his source for those DNC emails that he published on the eve of the Democratic National Convention. And ultimately, this is being promoted at the Trump White House itself. Steve Bannon is calling the Seth Rich's death a contract kill, obviously, and Sean Hannity at Fox News takes it up in May of 2017 and shouts it to the rooftops. It's a classic case of how fake news literally can be planted by a foreign intelligence service and then make its way through the social media bloodstream to arguably millions of American viewers on cable TV.
Well, that begs a question, Michael. How actively did the Russians try to spread this, or did they just plant the seed and then sort of the political machinery on the Republican side picked it up from there?
Well, it's a bit of both, and we document this pretty well in Conspiracyland. The Russian intelligence service planted the seed, but then as the story got traction, as various alt-right websites picked it up, as Julian Assange gave fuel to it, and then as Fox News, pushed it out there, the Russian media, RT and Sputnik, played up every development, and perhaps even more concerning, the Internet Research Agency, that Russian troll farm in St. Petersburg that conducted the social media manipulation during the 2016 campaign, they were pushing out the Seth Rich conspiracies. We counted more than 2,000 times that various trolls in St. Petersburg tweeted and retweeted about Seth Rich. In these cases, they're masquerading as being American citizens, American political groups. One of the most active was called 10_GOP, masquerading as a Twitter handle of the Tennessee Republican Party. It was actually a Russian troll in St. Petersburg, and it was continually tweeting, retweeting, pushing out the Seth Rich conspiracy theory.
I know there were media outlets that tried to do due diligence on this and tried to investigate, but we're in a sort of conservative feedback loop. And I guess I'm wondering, Michael, did any conservative media outlets try to do any research on this or any due diligence, try to ask questions as to the veracity of these claims?
Well, as you know, Fox News published it, and they ran with it on its website. That gave the fodder for Sean Hannity and Newt Gingrich and other Fox News personalities to talk about it. But Fox News retracted that story 8 days after it was published. After it did its damage, Fox News realized there was absolutely nothing to it. The story was falling apart. One of the two key sources was disavowing what he was quoted as saying. The other source never materialized. I think even Fox News realized that this entire thing was bogus. But that didn't end the story. I mean, there were all sorts of fringe players that continued to push it, that continued to promote this idea. But as far as due diligence, one of the things we do in this podcast series is we track down the assistant U.S. attorney in charge of the Seth Rich case. She's now retired. Her name is Deborah Sines. She was dealing with all this. And first of all, she says these conspiracy theories were a complete fabrication. There was absolutely no evidence in the course of the police investigation and the U.S. Attorney's investigation that ever found any links between Seth Rich and WikiLeaks or any links between Seth Rich and his death that had anything to do with his job at the DNC. And she talks for the first time and makes it very clear just how furious she was that these conspiracy theories were being promoted by the Russians and alt-right folks about the case she was trying to investigate.
How solidly is this conspiracy theory lodged in the conservative mindset right now? If I went to a Trump rally today, what's your guess on what percentage of the people in attendance would wrongly think that Seth Rich was murdered by Hillary Clinton?
You'd still hear it. Look, there are still fringe players out there in the dark corners of the internet who will continue to promote this. You'll continue to see signs and posters at Trump rallies mentioning Seth Rich after the Mueller report came out. After our podcast got released, you saw people pushing back, claiming once again that Seth Rich was somehow part of some political plot and assassinated for it. So, you know, the really tragic thing is these conspiracy theories, no matter how much they're debunked, they never die. And probably the emotional core of our story is what this has meant for the Rich family. Seth Rich's parents and Omaha have watched with anguish as these theories continue to circulate, telling lies about their son. Their brother, as Seth Rich's brother, speaks for the first time in this series, talks about how horrible this has been for his life because people on these conspiracy theorists have accused him of covering up details about his own brother's death, and that Aaron Rich himself may have been involved in leaking the emails to WikiLeaks. Completely unsubstantiated, nothing to back any of these claims up, but they live on because that's the conspiracy culture that we live in today.
So, Michael, what do you think of the wider lessons here? What does the Rich story tell us about Russian influence and propaganda, as well as how it's used and digested in the U.S.?
It really shows just how easy it is to plant a phony conspiracy theory onto and get it into that social media bloodstream, to get it on Facebook, to get it on Twitter. It circulates, it gets retweeted, it gets liked, and people who want to believe this stuff will continue to believe it. It is a microcosm of how Russian intelligence operatives and Russian trolls manipulated us during the 2016 election and can continue to manipulate us. And you know, it's really we talk a lot, quite rightly, about the threat of another Russian hack during the next election campaign, of cyber threats, but this social media threat is every bit as sinister, every bit as dangerous, in some ways even more dangerous, because it plays with our heads, it plays with our minds, and it is very easy to do when you have this polarized political culture that we do have in the United States.
Well, Michael, that leads to an important question. A lot of people are talking about protecting our elections, especially in the wake of the Mueller testimony and the bills that are foundering in Congress. But how do we protect ourselves from this kind of propaganda attack? Can we, or is the onus really on voters to be a little more discerning when it comes to the information that they get and how they process it?
It's on voters, it's on the social media companies to police this stuff. They're very wary about censorship, about dictating what you can read and what you can't read. But on the other hand, this stuff has real life impacts. It has real life impacts on people, everybody associated with Seth Rich, not just his family, his friends, his associates, his colleagues, people who had even random interactions with him have been targeted by internet bullies who have gone after him and suggested that they're all holding back something that would unmask the truth about what happened. So it's very dangerous stuff, and it's something we in mainstream media need to be alert to this, to be able to push out the truth when these falsehoods get recycled. It's important for the social media companies to police blatant falsehoods that gets put on their platforms, and of course, it's the onus is on voters themselves to be a little more diligent about what they read and what they share on social media.
Michael Isikoff is the chief investigative correspondent for Yahoo News. He is also the host of the Conspiracyland podcast on the Seth Rich case and more. Michael, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And up next, to impeach or not to impeach, that's the question now facing Democrats. But is the answer to that question more about politics or the rule of law? We'll discuss and debate next.